Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Operator. Staff Sergeant Cody Strong adjusted his scope, the crosshairs dancing over the compound 3 miles away in the Afghan mountains. 20 years of military service had carved deep lines around his steel-gray eyes, and his weathered hands moved with the precision of a surgeon. At 42, Cody was what his colleagues called a ghost, a special operations sniper who could disappear into any landscape and eliminate targets that others couldn't even find. Target acquired, he whispered into his comm, watching a high-value Taliban commander emerge from the building. Painting the target now. The laser designator hummed softly as Cody marked the building for the incoming drone strike. In 30 seconds, a Hellfire missile would reduce the compound to rubble. It was just another Tuesday in his world of calculated violence and surgical precision. Cody had joined the Army straight out of high school in small-town Montana, driven by a combination of patriotism and a desperate need to escape his alcoholic father's fists. The military had given him purpose, structure, and most importantly, the skills to become one of the most feared operators in special forces. He'd serve in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and half a dozen Black Ops missions that officially never happened. His reputation was built on two things: his supernatural accuracy with a rifle and his absolute unwillingness to forgive betrayal. When a teammate had once leaked their position to insurgents for money, Cody had personally hunted the man down during leave and left him paralyzed in a Detroit alley. The incident was never reported, never investigated. Some betrayals, Cody believed, deserved permanent consequences. 3 years ago, he'd married Roseanne Brewer, a nurse he'd met during his recovery from shrapnel wounds. She was beautiful, compassionate, and claimed to understand the demands of military life. More importantly, she'd accepted his 8-year-old son Dino from his first marriage, a marriage that had ended when his ex-wife died in a car accident. Roseanne had brought her own baggage, a 6-year-old daughter named Emma from a previous relationship. Cody had embraced the role of stepfather, thinking he was building the family he'd never had growing up. For 3 years, their home in Fayetteville had been his sanctuary between deployments. Missile impact in 10 seconds. Came the voice through his earpiece. Cody watched through his scope as the building disappeared in a ball of orange flame. Another successful mission. In 48 hours, he'd be rotating home for a month of leave, time he planned to spend teaching Dino to hunt and maybe taking Roseanne on that delayed honeymoon to the mountains. The satellite phone in his pack buzzed. Strange. Only family emergencies came through that line during active operations. Strong here, he answered, expecting to hear his commanding officer's voice. Instead, a woman's voice crackled through the static. Sergeant Strong? This is Linda Hawkins from North Carolina Child Protective Services. Sir, your son Dino is in our care. Cody's blood turned to ice. Through the scope, he could see secondary explosions from the destroyed compound, but suddenly the war seemed very far away. What happened? His voice remained steady, but his finger had unconsciously moved to his rifle's trigger. Sir, his stepfather used a cigarette lighter on him. He's severely injured and being treated at Cape Fear Valley Medical Center. The burns are extensive. The world tilted. Stepfather? Cody was Dino's father. The only stepfather in the picture was... In the background of the call, he heard a child's sobbing voice. His son's voice, broken and terrified. He burned his initials into my arm. He said I was his property now. The words hit Cody like a sniper's bullet to the chest. His son, his boy who collected baseball cards and dreamed of becoming a Marine like his dad, had been branded like cattle by some piece of shit who was apparently living in his house. Who did this? Cody's voice dropped to a whisper that his unit knew meant someone was about to die. A man named Quentin Krause. He's been arrested, but... Cody ended the call. His commanding officer, Major Cornelius Clayton, materialized beside him with that uncanny ability that made him an excellent field commander. We'll finish this mission, Strong. Go home and teach that fool a lesson he'll never forget. Clayton had served with Cody for 8 years. He'd seen what happened to people who crossed his best sniper. The major's cold smile suggested he wouldn't be filing any reports about what might happen to Mr. Quentin Krause. As Cody packed his gear with mechanical precision, his mind was already shifting into hunter mode. Someone had hurt his son and was apparently sleeping in his bed with his wife. The war in Afghanistan was about to become secondary to a much more personal conflict. He'd built his reputation on never forgetting and never forgiving betrayal. Now he was about to remind everyone why that reputation was well-earned. Chapter 2. The Betrayal Revealed. 18 hours later, Cody's boots hit the tarmac at Pope Army Airfield. He'd caught the first military transport out of Bagram, sleeping fitfully during the long flight while images of his son's terrified voice played on repeat in his mind. The October air in North Carolina felt alien after months in the desert, but what truly disoriented him was the civilian clothes in his duffel bag, clothes he'd need to blend in while he gathered intelligence on exactly what had happened to his family. Cape Fear Valley Medical Center loomed before him like a fortress. Cody had infiltrated terrorist compounds with less anxiety than he felt walking through those sterile hallways. A friendly nurse directed him to the pediatric burn unit, where he found his son sleeping in a bed that made the tough 8-year-old look impossibly small. Dino's left arm was wrapped in bandages, but Cody could see the edges of burned flesh where someone had deliberately pressed hot metal against his child's skin. The letters QK were branded into the boy's forearm like a rancher's mark on livestock. "Daddy." Dino's eyes fluttered open, and Cody saw a wariness there that hadn't existed before. The look of prey that had learned predators could strike without warning. "I'm here, buddy." Cody sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his voice gentle despite the volcanic rage building behind his ribs. "Tell me what happened." The story came out in halting whispers. 3 months ago, Mom had started bringing Uncle Quinn around more often. Quinn Krause was a construction foreman, big and loud, who'd moved into their house 2 weeks ago. He'd started hitting Mom when she talked back, then graduated to backhanding Dino when the boy tried to protect her. "He said you weren't coming back," Dino whispered. "He said he was my dad now, and I had to do what he said. When I told him you were my real dad, he got really mad. He heated up his lighter with the stove, and Cody gently squeezed his son's uninjured hand. "Where's Emma?" "She's with Grandma Brewer. Quinn never hurt her, just me and Mom." Dino's eyes filled with tears. "Is Mom okay?" She tried to stop him, but he hit her really hard. 20 minutes later, Cody sat in his truck outside the hospital, staring at his phone. 3 missed calls from Roseanne, 2 voicemails he hadn't listened to yet. His hands, steady enough to make 1,000-yard shots in combat, trembled slightly as he played the first message. "Cody, baby, I know how this looks, but I can explain everything. Quinn was just helping around the house while you were gone, and things got complicated. I never meant for any of this to happen. Please call me back." The second voicemail was different, desperate, pleading. "The police released Quinn on bail. He's talking about leaving town, but he wants to see me first. I'm scared, Cody. I know I messed up, but I need you. We need you." Cody deleted both messages without a trace of emotion. His wife, his partner, the woman he'd trusted with his son's safety, had brought a predator into their home. Worse, she was still in contact with the man who'd branded his child like property. The drive to his house took 15 minutes through neighborhoods that had once felt like home. Now every familiar street corner looked like a potential ambush site. Every parked car a possible threat. His house, a modest 2-story colonial with a lawn he'd spent weekends manicuring, sat at the end of Magnolia Drive like a crime scene waiting to be processed. Cody sat in his truck, studying the house through a sniper's eyes. Roseanne's Honda was in the driveway, but there was also a lifted red Ford F-250 with construction company logos and a thin blue line bumper sticker. Quinn was still here, moving with the silent precision that had kept him alive through hundreds of combat missions. Cody approached the house from the side yard. Through the kitchen window, he could see them, his wife and the man who'd tortured his son, sitting at the dinner table like a normal couple. Roseanne looked smaller than he remembered, her auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail that showed fresh bruises on her neck. She was crying, gesturing frantically while speaking in hushed tones. Quentin Krause was everything Cody had expected, A thick-necked bully with prison tattoos covering his forearms and dead eyes that suggested violence was his first language. "Told you the little shit would cause problems," Quinn was saying, his voice carrying through the thin window. "Should have just sent him to foster care when this started. He's just a boy, Quinn. He didn't deserve." The sound of Quinn's palm striking Roseanne's cheek was sharp as a gunshot. "Don't tell me what he deserved. I'm trying to make a family here, and that kid was disrespecting me in my own house." Cody's vision went red around the edges. His own house. The man was calling it his own house. "The soldier boy ain't coming back," Quinn continued, reaching across the table to grab Roseanne's wrist. "His kid understands who's in charge now. Question is, do you?" Cody had heard enough. He'd conducted surveillance on terror cells with less emotional control than he was maintaining now. Every instinct screamed for immediate action, to kick down the door and demonstrate exactly what 20 years of special operations training could do to a civilian wife beater. But Cody was a professional. He'd learned patience hunting men across 3 continents. This required planning, preparation, and most importantly, ensuring that when justice came, it would be permanent and untraceable. As he slipped back to his truck, one thought crystallized with the clarity of a perfect headshot. Quentin Krause had branded his son and was apparently planning to disappear with his wife. Neither of those things was going to happen. The war had followed him home, but this time, the enemy had made the fatal mistake of bringing it to his family first. Chapter 3. The Hunter's Preparation. Cody checked into a motel 20 minutes from his house, paying cash and registering under a false name he'd used in Syria. The room was Spartan, exactly how he preferred his operational base. He spread his son's medical records, police reports, and printed screenshots from Quinn's social media across the small table, studying his enemy with the same intensity he'd once reserved for high-value targets. Quentin Krause, age 35, had a history that painted him as exactly the kind of predator who hunted vulnerable women. 2 prior domestic violence arrests. Both charges dropped when the victims mysteriously changed their testimony. A dishonorable discharge from the Marines after 3 years of mediocre service. He'd been working construction in Fayetteville for 8 months, exactly 2 months before he'd started helping around Cody's house. The most interesting detail came from Quinn's Instagram account, which he'd kept active even after his arrest. Posted 6 hours ago. Time to start fresh somewhere new. Some people don't appreciate what they have. The geolocation tag showed he was posting from Cody's kitchen. Cody's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Heard you were back in town. Coffee tomorrow?" R. He studied the message for 30 seconds before responding. "Denny's on Bragg Boulevard. 8 a.m. While most betrayed husbands might have felt pain or confusion, Cody felt only the cold clarity that came with target acquisition. Rosen wasn't his wife anymore. She was a hostile asset who'd allowed enemy infiltration of his home base. The question wasn't whether she deserved forgiveness, but whether she'd be useful for intelligence gathering before final disposition. At midnight, Cody drove past his house again. Quinn's truck was gone, but Roseanne's car remained. Through disciplined observation, he established a pattern. Quinn left around 11 p.m. and returned by 7 a.m., probably staying at another location to avoid violating his bail conditions. Smart enough to avoid the obvious trap, but not smart enough to realize he was already being hunted. Cody spent the pre-dawn hours at a 24-hour gun range outside town, burning through 3 boxes of ammunition to keep his skills sharp. The familiar weight of his customized .308 rifle felt more comforting than any conversation he'd had since returning home. Each shot grouped tighter than a quarter at 100 yards, muscle memory from thousands of hours of practice. The plan forming in his mind was elegant in its simplicity. Quinn wanted to disappear with Roseanne. He'd disappear, all right, just not in the way he was expecting. At 8 a.m., Cody sat in a corner booth at Denny's, positioned to watch all entrances while keeping his back to a wall. Old habits. Roseanne arrived 10 minutes late, looking like she'd slept in her car. The confident nurse he'd married had been replaced by a hollow-eyed woman who jumped at shadows. "Thank God you're here," she whispered, sliding into the booth opposite him. "I was so afraid you wouldn't come." Cody studied her with the detached interest of a professional interrogator. 3 years of marriage had taught him her tells. The way she touched her neck when lying, how her voice pitched higher under stress. Right now, every tell was firing simultaneously. "Where's Quinn?" he asked quietly. He's staying with a friend until things calm down. "Cody, I need you to know that I never wanted any of this to happen. When you deployed, I was so lonely, and he was just helping with repairs around the house. I didn't know he had a temper until it was too late." The story was plausible, delivered with enough tears to convince most men. But Cody had interrogated Taliban commanders who were better liars. "How long?" he asked. "How long what? How long have you been sleeping with him?" Roseanne's face crumpled. 6 months. But it didn't mean anything, Cody. I was scared and alone, and he made me feel protected. 6 months. That minute had started during his previous deployment, long before Quinn had moved into their house. The timeline painted a different picture than her story of innocent repairs that got complicated. "He branded my son," Cody said, his voice perfectly level. Heated up a lighter and burned his initials into Dino's arm. "I tried to stop him. I swear I tried, but he's so much stronger than me. He said Dino needed to learn respect, and when I argued, he hit me too. Look." She pulled down her collar, showing finger-shaped bruises around her throat. Cody felt nothing looking at the marks. A year ago, they would have triggered his protective instincts. Now, they were just evidence that Quinn preferred hands-on violence. Useful intelligence for their inevitable confrontation. "Where is he really staying?" Cody asked. "I don't know. He has a friend named Freeman Mora who works construction with him. Maybe there." Another piece of the puzzle. Cody made a mental note to look up Freeman Mora. "He want me to leave with him," Roseanne continued. "Says we can start over somewhere fresh, maybe Tennessee or Georgia. He's talking about leaving this weekend. And you want to go?" The question hung between them like a loaded weapon. Roseanne's answer would determine whether she was a victim who'd made mistakes or an active collaborator in the destruction of his family. "I don't know what I want anymore," she whispered. "I know I hurt you, and I know I failed Dino. But I'm afraid of what Quinn will do if I try to leave him. He's not stable, Cody. He talks about killing people who cross him." Cody almost smiled at the irony. Quinn Krause had no idea what real killing looked like. "I'm going to fix this," he told her, dropping a 20 on the table. "You're going to go home and act normal. Don't tell Quinn we met. Don't change your routine. Can you do that?" Roseanne nodded eagerly, hope flickering in her eyes. "You're going to save us." Cody stood up, looking down at the woman who'd once been his wife. "I'm going to save my son. What happens to you depends on your choices in the next few days." As he walked away, Cody was already calculating distances, timelines, and disposal methods. Quinn Krause wanted to start fresh somewhere new. He was about to get exactly what he'd asked for. Chapter 4. Intelligence Gathering. By noon, Cody had transformed his motel room into a tactical operations center. A detailed map of Fayetteville covered one wall, marked with Quinn's known locations, his workplace, and the addresses of his known associates. Cody's military-issue laptop hummed quietly as it ran facial recognition software against security camera footage he'd obtained through contacts in base security. Freeman Mora's address had been easy to find through public records. A quick drive past the rundown duplex on the south side of town confirmed Quinn's red F-250 parked in the driveway. Cody noted the lack of security cameras, the isolated location, and the fact that Mora's neighbors were either drug addicts or working multiple jobs. Perfect for an operation requiring discretion. His phone buzzed with a text from Major Clayton. Package delivered to usual location. No questions asked. The package was waiting in a storage unit Cody maintained off-base, military-grade surveillance equipment, untraceable weapons, and other tools of his trade that weren't exactly standard issue. 20 years of special operations had taught him that sometimes the mission required resources that couldn't be requisitioned through official channels. By 3 p.m., Cody had established observation posts around both Mora's duplex and the construction site where Quinn worked. Digital cameras with telephoto lenses gave him real-time surveillance of his targets, while a frequency scanner monitored local police communications. Quinn's pattern was becoming clear. Work until 5 p.m., stop at Murphy's bar for 3 beers, then to Mora's place until late evening. At 6 p.m., Cody was positioned across the street from Murphy's bar when Quinn emerged, visibly drunk and stumbling toward his truck. Most people would have called the police about the obvious DUI in progress. Cody simply followed at a distance, noting that Quinn drove like the entitled asshole. He was speeding, weaving, running stop signs. Quinn's first stop was unexpected: the elementary school where both Dino and Emma attended classes. He sat in his truck in the parking lot for 20 minutes, engine running, staring at the playground where children played after-school programs. Cody felt his finger tighten on the encrypted radio that could summon Clayton and a full tactical team in under 10 minutes. But Quinn eventually drove away without incident, probably too drunk to realize school was still in session. The stop revealed something important, though. He was thinking about the kids, which meant he might try to grab them before his planned disappearance. That possibility died tonight. Quinn's next stop was more predictable: a liquor store where he bought a bottle of Jack Daniels and a carton of cigarettes. Cody noted the store's security cameras and made a mental note to ensure his face never appeared on them. By 8 p.m., Quinn was back at Moore's duplex, but he wasn't alone. Through his telephoto lens, Cody watched as 3 other men joined Quinn and Freeman in the backyard. The gathering had the feel of a planning session. Quinn gesturing emphatically while the others listened, occasional glances toward a map spread across a picnic table. Cody adjusted his parabolic microphone and caught fragments of conversation. Friday night, clean out the account. Across state lines by Saturday. A robbery. They were planning to rob something Friday night and use the money to fund their fresh start. The question was what they intended to hit, and whether Roseanne was part of the plan or just a convenient hostage. At 10 p.m., the meeting broke up. 2 of the men left in a beat-up Chevy, while the third, a tall, nervous-looking guy with a facial tattoo, remained behind with Quinn and Freeman. Cody photographed all of them, then settled in for a long night of surveillance. Around midnight, his patience was rewarded. Quinn emerged from the duplex, carrying a large duffel bag, which he loaded into his truck. When he drove away, Cody faced a choice: follow Quinn or investigate what he'd left behind. The duplex won. 15 minutes after Quinn left, Cody was inside Freeman Moore's home through a back window that had been left open. 20 years of breaking into terrorist safe houses had taught him how to move through civilian spaces without leaving traces. The place was a shrine to failure. Unpaid bills stacked on a table, empty beer cans covering every surface, and the overwhelming smell of cigarettes and desperation. But it was the bedroom that provided real intelligence. Spread across Freeman's bed were detailed floor plans of the First National Bank on Hay Street, guard schedules, and photographs of the armored car service that made Monday morning pickups. Quinn's crew was planning to hit the bank's weekend deposits before the Monday pickup, potentially hundreds of thousands in cash. More interesting was what Cody found in the closet: tactical gear that looked suspiciously like surplus military equipment, including body armor and weapons that were definitely not legal for civilian ownership. Someone in Quinn's crew had connections to serious criminal networks. A notebook on the nightstand contained the real prize. RB says she can get us the alarm codes from her hospital shift supervisor. Bank manager's wife works there. RB, Roseanne Brewer. His wife wasn't just a victim who'd made bad choices. She was an active participant in planning the robbery that would fund her new life with Quinn Krause. Cody photographed everything, then slipped back out the window. As he drove back to his motel, he felt the cold satisfaction that came with target confirmation. Both Quinn and Roseanne had just upgraded from personal problems to enemy combatants. The bank robbery was scheduled for Friday night. That gave him 3 days to prepare his own operation. Quinn wanted to disappear with stolen money and a married woman. He was about to get half of what he'd asked for. Chapter 5. The Trap is Set. Thursday morning brought unseasonably cold weather to Fayetteville, along with news that made Cody's blood run ice cold. The hospital called to inform him that Dino had developed an infection in his burn wounds and would need to stay another week for treatment. Someone had been asking questions about the boy's discharge date. Cody arrived at the hospital to find 2 security guards posted outside his son's room, a precaution he'd arranged through military channels after discovering Quinn's school surveillance. But the guards were new faces, men he didn't recognize. "Where are Roberts and Martinez?" he asked the charge nurse. "They called in sick this morning." These are replacement guards from a private company. The replacement guards had the look of men who'd learned violence in prison rather than military service. When Cody asked to see their credentials, both men tensed in ways that confirmed his suspicions. "You need to leave," the larger guard said, his hand moving towards something concealed under his jacket. "Hospital security only." Cody smiled, the cold expression that had been the last thing many enemies had seen. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The hallway cleared quickly as Cody demonstrated exactly why Special Forces operators were trained in close-quarters combat. Neither fake guard had time to reach their weapons before finding themselves unconscious on the linoleum floor. The encounter lasted less than 30 seconds and was captured by security cameras that mysteriously malfunctioned immediately afterward. Hospital security arrived to find the two men zip-tied to chairs with identification cards that revealed them as associates of Freeman Mora. Quinn had sent men to grab Dino, probably as leverage for the bank job or insurance for his escape. "We need to move you," Cody told his son, while legitimate guard from the base were summoned. "How do you feel about spending a few days with Uncle Clayton?" Dino, despite everything he'd endured, managed a weak smile. "Does Uncle Clayton still have that cool motorcycle?" Within 2 hours, Dino was safely hidden at Clayton's off-base residence under the protection of 2 Delta Force operators on vacation. Quinn's attempt to grab the boy had failed, but more importantly, it had revealed the timeline for his larger plan. The bank job was happening tonight, not Friday. Cody spent Thursday afternoon conducting final reconnaissance of the First National Bank. The building was a standard commercial structure with predictable security, cameras, motion sensors, and a silent alarm connected directly to Fayetteville PD. The armored car pickup happened Monday mornings at 9 a.m., which meant weekend deposits would be sitting in the main vault for maximum payoff. Quinn's plan was actually well conceived. Hit the bank during the minimal security window between Saturday evening and Monday morning, grab the weekend deposits, and disappear before anyone realized the money was gone. If Roseanne was providing inside information about alarm codes, they might actually pull it off, which was exactly what Cody was counting on. At 6 p.m., he positioned himself in an abandoned building across from the bank with a clear view of all approaches. His gear included night vision, encrypted communications, and enough firepower to stop a small army. More importantly, he had something Quinn's crew lacked: professional training and absolute commitment to his mission. Roseanne's Honda pulled up at 7:30 p.m., confirming her active participation. She sat in the car for 10 minutes, probably gathering courage, before walking to the bank's employee entrance. Her key card still worked. She'd obviously been planning this for weeks. Quinn's truck arrived 15 minutes later, followed by Freeman's Chevy with 2 additional crew members. All 4 men were heavily armed and wearing ski masks that wouldn't fool security cameras for long. They were amateurs playing at being professionals. Cody watched through his scope as Roseanne disabled the alarm system from inside, then opened the rear door for Quinn's team. The robbery was textbook, fast, efficient, and completely predictable. What they didn't expect was the SWAT team that surrounded the building 5 minutes after they entered. Cody had called in an anonymous tip about suspicious activity, timing it perfectly to trap Quinn's crew inside with the stolen money. Through his scope, he watched chaos erupt as heavily armed police surrounded every exit. Quinn appeared at the front window. Roseanne held at gunpoint as he screamed demands that no one could hear clearly. The standoff was exactly what Cody had orchestrated: public, documented, and guaranteed to end with Quinn in federal prison for bank robbery and hostage-taking. But Cody wasn't finished. Using skills learned in urban warfare, he infiltrated the police perimeter through storm drains that connected to the bank's basement. While SWAT negotiators kept Quinn distracted at the front of the building, Cody entered through the foundation access and made his way to the vault level. He found Freeman Mora standing guard over 2 bags of stolen cash, nervous and sweating despite the cool evening air. The man never saw Cody coming. "Freeman," Cody whispered from the shadows. When Freeman spun around, gun raised, Cody was already moving. 20 years of close-quarters combat training compressed into 3 seconds of violence that left Freeman unconscious and zip-tied next to the stolen money. The other 2 crew members met similar fates as Cody methodically worked his way through the building. By the time he reached the main floor, Quinn was alone with Roseanne and completely unaware that his backup had been neutralized. Through the bank's security monitors, Cody could see Quinn pressed against the front windows, using Roseanne as a human shield while SWAT snipers found their angles. The man was trapped, desperate, and about to make the kind of mistake that would justify what came next. Cody keyed his radio to the police frequency and spoke in the calm voice of someone providing tactical intelligence. Subject has female hostage at front window. Recommend maintaining containment while secondary team enters through basement access. What he didn't mention was that the secondary team was already inside and had very different orders than arrest and detention. The trap was set. Now came the justice. Chapter 6, The Reckoning begins. Inside the bank, Quinn Krause was learning the difference between planning a crime and executing one under pressure. SWAT's floodlights turned the front windows into a fishbowl, while their negotiator's voice echoed through a bullhorn with offers that sounded more like threats. This is your last chance, Mr. Krause. Release the hostage and surrender, or we're coming in. Quinn pressed the gun harder against Roseanne's temple, his hand shaking with a combination of adrenaline and alcohol withdrawal. I want a helicopter and safe passage. You got 1 hour or the bitch dies. He'd watched too many movies, made too many assumptions about how hostage negotiations worked. What he hadn't accounted for was that his hostage was the wife of a man who'd spent 20 years killing people who threatened his family. Cody emerged from the shadows behind Quinn like a predator who'd been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His movement was silent, controlled, and absolutely lethal in its intent. Hello, Quinn. The voice made Quinn spin around, dragging Roseanne with him. He found himself face-to-face with a man who looked like death personified, calm, focused, and completely unimpressed by the gun pointed in his direction. You're supposed to be in Afghanistan, Quinn stammered. I was painting a target for a drone strike when a call came in, Cody said conversationally. It was a Child Protective Services agent. She told me someone had branded my son like cattle. Quinn's gun wavered between Cody and Roseanne, his tactical position suddenly much more complicated. Outside, SWAT was closing in. Behind him stood a man who'd made a career of killing people in their sleep. Stay back. I'll kill her. Cody tilted his head slightly, considering the threat with professional interest. Will you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you need her alive. Dead hostages don't buy you passage out of federal prison. The psychological pressure was deliberate. Cody had interrogated terrorists who'd cracked under less focused attention. Quinn was just a small-town bully who'd never faced someone who understood violence as a craft rather than an impulse. Besides, Cody continued, taking a step closer, she's not really my wife anymore. Hard to be married to someone who's planning bank robberies with a man who tortured your stepson. Roseanne's eyes widened in shock. Cody, I can explain. You got inside information about the alarm codes from someone at the hospital, Cody interrupted. You provided the timing for when security would be minimal. You've been planning this for weeks, haven't you? The admission was written across her face before she could deny it. Quinn's insurance policy had just become worthless. So here's what's going to happen, Cody said, close enough now that Quinn would have to choose between shooting him or Roseanne, but not both. You're going to put the gun down, and we're going to have a conversation about boundaries. Fuck you. Quinn swung the weapon toward Cody, but his movements were those of an amateur, telegraphed, emotional, and fatally slow. Cody's response was the product of 2 decades of training and combat experience. His hand closed around Quinn's wrist like a steel trap, applying pressure to nerve points that made the man's fingers go numb. The gun clattered to the floor as Quinn screamed in pain. Roseanne tried to run, but Cody's other hand caught her wrist with casual efficiency. She wasn't going anywhere until this conversation was finished. 20 years, Cody said quietly, maintaining his grip on both of them. 20 years I've been killing people who threaten innocent families. You know what the difference is between you and them? Quinn was gasping for air, his wrist bent at an angle that suggested permanent damage was imminent. What? They were fighting for something they believed in. You're just a coward who beats children. The sound of Quinn's wrist breaking was sharp as a gunshot. His scream echoed through the bank, audible even over the police bullhorns outside. Roseanne tried to pull away, but Cody's grip was unbreakable. My son is 8 years old, Cody continued conversationally. He collects baseball cards and wants to be a Marine when he grows up. You burned your initials into his arm and told him he was your property. Quinn was sobbing now, cradling his shattered wrist. I was drunk. I didn't mean. You heated up a lighter with the stove, Cody interrupted. That's premeditation. That's deliberate torture of child. Through the bank's windows, SWAT was preparing for entry. Cody could see laser sights painting the walls, hear the tactical teams coordinating their breach. He had maybe 3 minutes before this became significantly more complicated. Here's what's going to happen to you, Quinn. You get a federal prison for bank robbery. If you're lucky, you'll get protective custody. If you're not, Cody leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I have friends in every major prison system, men who don't approve of people who hurt children. The implications were clear enough that even Quinn's alcohol-damaged brain could process them. Federal prison was where he was going. What happened to child abusers in federal prison was legendary. But Cody wasn't finished. As for you, he said, turning to Roseanne, you're going to prison too. Conspiracy to commit bank robbery, providing material support to criminal activity. Your daughter, Emma, is going to grow up knowing her mother chose a child abuser over her family. Roseanne's face crumpled. Please, Cody. I made mistakes, but I love you. We can fix this. No, Cody said simply. We can't. The SWAT breach came precisely when he expected it. Explosive charges on the rear door, followed by tactical teams flowing through the building like water. Cody released both his prisoners and stepped back, hands visible and empty. Federal agent, he called out, displaying credentials that would pass casual inspection. Suspect secured. The team leader, a veteran who recognized professional competence, nodded acknowledgement. Casualties, one suspect with a broken wrist. Self-inflicted during attempted assault on a federal officer. Quinn was screaming about his rights and demanding medical attention while Roseanne sobbed uncontrollably. Both were zip-tied and led away as evidence teams cataloged the stolen money and weapons. As far as the official record would show, Quinn Krause had injured himself during the failed bank robbery, and Roseanne Brewer had been an unfortunate hostage who turned out to be a co-conspirator. The mysterious federal agent who'd infiltrated the building during negotiations would vanish into bureaucratic paperwork that led nowhere. But Cody's work wasn't finished. Quinn and Roseanne were going to prison, but justice required something more permanent than the federal correctional system could provide. The real reckoning was just beginning. Chapter 7, Federal Justice. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in Raleigh buzzed with activity as Quinn Krause and Roseanne Brewer faced sentencing for their roles in the first national bank robbery. The local media had covered the case extensively, a domestic violence perpetrator and his lover attempting to fund their escape with stolen money made for compelling headlines. Cody sat in the gallery wearing his dress blues, every ribbon and decoration earned through 2 decades of service. To the casual observer, he was simply a concerned father attending his ex-wife's sentencing. Only a few people in the courtroom knew that he'd orchestrated every element of the case that had brought them here. Quinn, wearing an orange jumpsuit and sporting a permanently twisted left wrist, looked like a broken man. 6 months in federal custody awaiting trial had not been kind to him. Word had spread quickly through the prison population that he was a child abuser, and even in protective custody, accidents happened. His face bore fresh bruises that the guards claimed to know nothing about. Mr. Krause, Judge Mercedes Schwartz said, her voice cutting through the courtroom's murmur, you have pled guilty to armed bank robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, and child abuse. The prosecution has recommended 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Quinn's court-appointed attorney tried to argue for leniency, citing his client's troubled childhood and substance abuse issues. The judge listened with the patience required by law, but her expression suggested she'd heard it all before. Cody had made sure certain facts reached the prosecution team through unofficial channels. Quinn's previous domestic violence arrests, witness statements from neighbors who'd heard Dino screaming, and medical records that showed the burn pattern was consistent with deliberate torture rather than accidental injury. Mrs. Brewer, the judge continued, turning to Roseanne, your role in this crime is particularly troubling. You provided inside information to plan the robbery, and you did so while failing to protect an 8-year-old child from documented abuse. Roseanne's attorney, a more competent defender than Quinn could afford, had negotiated a plea deal, 15 years in federal prison in exchange for testifying against her co-conspirators. She tried to portray herself as another victim, manipulated by Quinn's violence and threats. The strategy might have worked if not for the evidence Cody had anonymously provided. Bank records showing Roseanne had opened secret accounts to hide money. Hotel receipts proving the affair had started long before Quinn moved into their house. Most damning, recorded phone calls from jail where she discussed escape plans with Quinn. I loved him, Roseanne had sobbed during her testimony. I know it was wrong, but I was afraid of what he'd do if I left him. The prosecution had methodically destroyed that narrative. If she'd been afraid for her safety, why had she provided alarm codes for the bank robbery? If she'd been concerned about the children, why had she never reported the abuse to authorities? Both defendants will serve their sentences in federal facilities, Judge Schwartz announced. Mr. Krause will be transferred to ADX Florence in Colorado. Mrs. Brewer will serve her time at FCI Dublin in California. ADX Florence, Supermax, the facility where they sent terrorists, organized crime leaders, and the most dangerous criminals in federal custody. Quinn would spend 23 hours a day in an 8x12 concrete cell, with 1 hour of exercise in a larger concrete box. No contact with other inmates, no television, no books except religious texts. It was a death sentence that would take 25 years to complete. Roseanne's destination was less severe, but equally permanent. FCI Dublin housed white-collar criminals and non-violent offenders, but word would reach the other inmates about why she was there. Women who'd lost their own children to abuse and neglect didn't typically welcome child enablers with open arms. As the courtroom emptied, Cody approached the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Elisa Dudley who'd handled the case with impressive thoroughness. Thank you, he said simply. Thank the evidence, she replied. This case had more documentation than most terrorism prosecutions. Someone did very thorough investigative work. Cody nodded. Someone indeed. Outside the courthouse, he found Dino waiting by their truck. The boy had grown 3 inches in 6 months and was learning to use his left arm normally again despite the scarring. The burns had healed, but they'd left permanent marks, a reminder that some wounds never completely disappeared. Is it over? Dino asked. The legal part is over, Cody said. Quinn's going to prison for the rest of his life. He'll never hurt anyone again. What about Mom? That was the hardest question. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that his stepmother had chosen a criminal over his safety? That she'd helped plan a bank robbery while letting him get tortured? Your mom made some very bad choices, Cody said carefully. She's going to prison too, but for a shorter time. When you're older, if you want to see her, we can talk about it. Dino considered this with the seriousness that trauma had forced on him too early. I don't think I want to see her. She knew he was hurting me, and she didn't stop him. The boy's insight was painful but accurate. Roseanne had chosen her lover over her stepson's safety, then compounded the betrayal by helping plan their escape funding. Some breaks in trust couldn't be repaired. As they drove home, to a new house on the other side of town, far from the crime scene their old home had become, Cody reflected on the completeness of his victory. Quinn would die in solitary confinement. Roseanne would spend her prime years in federal prison. Both would lose everything they tried to steal. But justice, Cody had learned, required more than legal consequences. That evening, he made 2 phone calls. The first was to a contact at ADX Florence, a guard who owed him favors from their time serving together in Iraq. The second was to a woman at FCI Dublin who understood that some debts followed people behind bars. Quinn and Roseanne had legal protection now. What they didn't have was the kind of protection that money couldn't buy and lawyers couldn't provide. The reckoning was nearly complete. Chapter 8. Permanent Solutions. 1 year after the sentencing, Cody received 2 pieces of news that confirmed his understanding of how justice actually worked in the real world. The first came via a brief phone call from ADX Florence. Quinn Krause had been found dead in his cell, apparently the victim of a heart attack brought on by stress and poor health. The official report noted that he'd been suffering from depression and had repeatedly complained of chest pains that medical staff attributed to anxiety. No autopsy would be performed. Budget constraints and the obvious cause of death made it unnecessary. What the report didn't mention was that Quinn had spent his final months in a state of constant terror. The isolation at ADX was designed to break the human spirit, but Quinn's particular torment had been more personal. Somehow, despite the facility's extreme security, he'd received regular messages from other inmates who knew exactly what he'd done to an 8-year-old boy. The messages weren't threats, they were promises. Detailed descriptions of what child abusers experienced in general population. Stories about previous cases where protective custody had failed. Reminders that even in Supermax, guards sometimes made mistakes. Quinn had requested transfer to another facility 17 times. Each request had been denied for administrative reasons that didn't quite make sense. He tried to commit suicide twice, but ADX was designed to prevent even that escape. Instead, he'd lived in constant fear until his body finally surrendered to the stress. The second piece of news came 3 days later from FCI Dublin. Roseanne Brewer had been killed during what the warden described as an altercation with another inmate over television programming. The other inmate, a woman serving time for killing her abusive ex-husband, claimed self-defense when Roseanne had attacked her with an improvised weapon. Security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during the incident, and no other inmates had witnessed the altercation. The investigation concluded that Roseanne had been the aggressor, which meant no additional charges would be filed. She'd been buried in a pauper's grave since no family members had claimed the body. Cody read both reports while drinking coffee on his back porch, watching Dino practice batting in their new backyard. The boy was thriving, straight A's in school, nightmares decreasing in frequency, and absolutely no memory problems despite what the doctors had initially feared about trauma-induced cognitive issues. Emma, Roseanne's daughter, was doing equally well with her grandmother in Virginia. The old woman had been horrified to learn about her daughter's crimes and had immediately filed for full custody. The girl was young enough that the details had been kept from her. She knew only that her mother had made bad choices and wouldn't be coming home for a long time. "Dad," Dino called from the yard. "Can we go fishing this weekend?" "Absolutely," Cody replied. "Just you and me." That evening, Cody made one final phone call related to the case. Major Clayton answered on the first ring. "I heard Quinn Krause died of natural causes," Clayton said without preamble. Apparently, the stress of incarceration was too much for his system. "Tragic," Cody replied. "I also heard Roseanne got into a fight with the wrong woman." Prison can be dangerous for people who hurt children. Unfortunately, protective custody isn't always protective enough. They spoke for a few more minutes about Dino's progress in school and Cody's plans to retire from active duty next year. Neither man mentioned that favors had been called in, that debts accumulated over 20 years of military service had been spent to ensure permanent justice. Some conversations didn't need to be explicit. The next morning, Cody drove to Dino's school for a parent-teacher conference. Mrs. Lila English, his son's third-grade teacher, had requested the meeting to discuss Dino's remarkable improvement over the past year. "He's like a different child," she explained, showing Cody samples of Dino's artwork and writing assignments. "The trauma counseling has helped enormously, but I think what's made the biggest difference is his sense of security. He knows he's safe now." Safe. It was a simple word that encompassed everything Cody had fought for over the past 18 months. His son was safe because the people who'd threatened him were permanently removed from the equation. Not transferred, not paroled, not given second chances to hurt other children. Removed. "He talks about you constantly," Mrs. English continued. "How you're a soldier who protects people, how you came home to save him. You're his hero." Cody felt an emotion he'd almost forgotten existed: pride without reservation. For 20 years, he'd served his country by killing enemies in foreign lands. But this mission, protecting his son from domestic predators, felt like the most important service he'd ever performed. That afternoon, he picked Dino up from school and drove to their favorite ice cream shop. As they sat sharing a sundae, his son asked the question that Cody had been expecting for months. "Dad, what happened to Quinn and Mom?" Cody had prepared for this conversation, consulting with child psychologists about how much truth an 8-year-old could handle. The answer was surprisingly simple: enough truth to understand that justice had been served, but not so much that he'd feel responsible for their fates. "They both died in prison," Cody said gently. "Quinn got sick from stress, and your mom got into a fight with another prisoner. They can't hurt anyone anymore." Dino considered this while carefully eating around the cherry on top of their sundae. "Are you sad about Mom?" "I'm sad about the person I thought she was," Cody answered honestly. "But I'm not sad that she can't make bad choices anymore." "Me neither," Dino said with the brutal honesty of childhood. "She knew he was hurting me, and she didn't stop him. That's not what moms are supposed to do." No, Cody thought it definitely wasn't. As they finished their ice cream and headed home, Cody reflected on the completeness of his mission. Quinn Krause and Roseanne Brewer were dead, their deaths officially ruled as unrelated incidents that had nothing to do with the husband and father they'd betrayed. The evidence trail led nowhere. The favors had been repaid, and the debts had been settled. Most importantly, Dino was safe, thriving, and learning that some people in the world could be trusted to keep their promises about protection. The war was over. His family had won. Chapter 9: New Beginnings. 2 years after the bank robbery, Cody stood in the kitchen of their new house, making pancakes while Dino set the table for breakfast. Sunlight streamed through windows that looked out on a garden they'd planted together: tomatoes, peppers, and a small herb section that the boy tended with religious devotion. The house was everything their old home hadn't been: secure, peaceful, and completely free of haunted memories. Cody had chosen the location carefully: a quiet neighborhood with excellent schools, where his reputation as a decorated veteran made him a respected neighbor rather than a curiosity. "Dad, Coach Blake wants to know if you can help with baseball practice next week," Dino said, pouring orange juice with the careful concentration of a 10-year-old trying not to spill. "I'll be there," Cody promised. "What position are you playing now?" "Pitcher. Coach says I have good control." Control. It was a word that had different meanings in their house than in most families. For Dino, it meant mastering his curveball and learning to place the ball exactly where he wanted it. For Cody, it meant ensuring that his son grew up understanding that some people could be trusted completely while others revealed their true nature only under pressure. The boy had processed his trauma with the resilience of youth, aided by excellent counseling and the absolute security of knowing his father would never let anyone hurt him again. He still bore the scars on his arm, QK burned into his flesh, but they'd become something different over time. Not a mark of victimization, but proof that he'd survived and overcome. Cody's phone buzzed with a text from Major Clayton: "Package pickup at 1,400 hours. Standard protocols." The message was code for their monthly check-in at a safe house near Fort Bragg. Since retiring from active duty, Cody had transitioned into private contract work, the kind of missions that required a particular skill set, but couldn't be officially acknowledged by any government agency. The work was lucrative and satisfying in ways that conventional employment couldn't match. When corporate executives needed problems solved permanently, when foreign assets required protection that couldn't be provided through official channels, when justice required services that courts couldn't deliver, they called Cody strong. His reputation in those circles was built on two principles: absolute discretion and permanent solutions. The clients who hired him weren't interested in rehabilitation or second chances. They wanted problems erased completely and professionally. "Will you be home for dinner?" Dino asked, interrupting his thoughts. "Always," Cody replied. "We have a rule about that, remember? Family dinner every night unless you're saving the world." And am I saving the world today? Dino considered this with mock seriousness. "Probably. You usually are." At 2 p.m., Cody arrived at the safe house to find Clayton waiting with a new dossier. The target was a human trafficking coordinator who'd been moving children through military bases using forged dependent IDs. 3 previous attempts to prosecute him had failed due to evidence mysteriously disappearing and witnesses recanting their testimony. He's got protection at federal level, Clayton explained. Someone with enough influence to make cases disappear. Local law enforcement is frustrated, FBI is handcuffed by politics, and meanwhile kids keep disappearing. Cody studied the photographs and background information with professional interest. The target, Reynaldo Beard, operated from a compound in South Carolina that was technically a religious retreat but functioned as a processing center for trafficked children. His network included corrupt officials, compromised social workers, and enough legitimate religious cover to deflect casual investigation. How many kids? Cody asked. Unknown. Conservative estimate based on disappearances and witness reports. At least 40 over the past 3 years. 40 children. Some of them probably Dino's age when the trafficking started. Timeline. Client wants this resolved before his operation expands into North Carolina. Apparently, Beard has been scouting locations near military bases here. The mission was exactly the kind of work Cody had specialized in during his contract career. High-value target, significant collateral benefit, and the kind of justice that courts couldn't deliver due to systemic corruption. Fee, $2 million, plus expenses and cleanup. Cody closed the dossier. I'll need 2 weeks for reconnaissance and planning. The client was hoping for something faster. The client can hope for a lot of things. Professional work takes professional timelines. That evening, over dinner at their kitchen table, Dino told him about a new kid at school, a quiet boy named Xavier who'd been placed with a foster family after his parents had abandoned him. The other kids were being mean because Xavier was behind in his studies and wore clothes that didn't fit properly. I told him he could sit with us at lunch, Dino said. Is that okay? Of course it's okay. What else did you do? I gave him half my sandwich because he didn't have much food, and I asked Mrs. English if she had any extra supplies for kids who need them. Cody felt that familiar surge of pride. His son was developing into exactly the kind of person who deserved protection from predators like Reynaldo Beard. You did the right thing, he said. Taking care of people who can't protect themselves is important work. Like what you do. Exactly like what I do. Later that night, after Dino was asleep, Cody sat on their back porch planning his approach to the South Carolina mission. The target was well protected and politically connected, but he'd also made the fatal mistake of expanding his operation into Cody's operational area. Some people never learned that there were men in the world who treated child predators as legitimate targets of war. Reynaldo Beard was about to receive an education in the difference between federal protection and professional elimination. As Cody studied satellite photos of the compound and began calculating approach routes, he reflected on how perfectly his life had arranged itself. During the day, he was a devoted father who coached Little League and attended school plays. At night, he eliminated threats to children who didn't have fathers capable of protecting them. Quinn Krause and Roseanne Brewer had been personal, justice for his own family's betrayal. But Reynaldo Beard represented something larger. Proof that some people forfeited their right to exist when they chose to prey on children. The mission would begin tomorrow with reconnaissance flights and electronic surveillance. Within 2 weeks, 40 missing children would be avenged, and one trafficking network would be permanently dismantled. Cody Strong had found his purpose in life, protecting children who couldn't protect themselves and eliminating predators who thought they were beyond the reach of justice. It was the kind of work that let him sleep peacefully every night, knowing that his son lived in a world where some evils met permanent endings. The war continued, but now he was fighting for the right side on the battlefield that mattered most. Epilogue. 5 years later, Dino Strong graduated as valedictorian of his 8th grade class and announced his intention to follow his father's path into military service. The scars on his arm had faded to thin white lines that he wore like badges of honor, proof that he'd survived and overcome. Cody watched from the audience, wearing civilian clothes, but maintaining the bearing of a man who dedicated his life to protecting innocence from evil. In the past 5 years, his contract work had eliminated 17 high-value targets involved in child trafficking, domestic terrorism, and other crimes that official channels couldn't address. Each mission had been planned with the same precision he'd once brought to military operations, executed with the same professional competence, and concluded with the same permanent results. His reputation in certain circles was legendary. When conventional justice failed, when courts were compromised, when the system couldn't protect its most vulnerable citizens, Cody Strong could be trusted to provide permanent solutions. The work had made him wealthy, but more importantly, it had given him purpose beyond simple revenge. Quinn Krause and Roseanne Brewer had been the beginning, not the end. They'd taught him that some people forfeited their right to exist when they chose to prey on children. As Dino accepted his graduation diploma and looked toward the audience with pride that needed no words, Cody knew that his son understood the most important lesson of their shared trauma. The world contained evil people who would hurt children if given the opportunity, but also contained good people who would eliminate those predators permanently if necessary. Some lessons were worth any price to teach. Some justice was worth any risk to deliver. And some fathers would cross any line to ensure their children grew up in a world where monsters faced permanent consequences for their choices. The war between protectors and predators was eternal, but Cody Strong had chosen his side long ago. He would never forgive. He would never forget. And he would never stop hunting. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Fury. Raymond Thornfield had built his empire from nothing, turning a small construction company inherited from his late father into the largest residential development firm in Millbrook County. At 45, his calloused hands still bore the scars from his early days swinging hammers and laying concrete, but his mind had grown sharp as a blade through years of calculated risks and strategic partnerships. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd spent his life building homes for happy families while his own crumbled from within. Victoria, beautiful, ambitious Victoria, had seemed like the perfect partner when they'd married 22 years ago. She'd been a real estate agent then, hungry for success and willing to work the long hours that matched his own relentless drive. Together, they'd climbed from a modest apartment to a sprawling estate on Magnolia Hill, complete with a tennis court Victoria never used and a pool that became Emma's favorite retreat. Emma, his daughter, had been the light of his world, inheriting his stubborn determination but tempering it with her mother's social grace. She graduated summa cum laude from Duke, landed a prestigious position at a Charlotte law firm, and was now engaged to Timothy Walsh, heir to a banking fortune. Ray had walked her down the aisle in his mind 1,000 times, imagining the pride swelling in his chest as he placed her hand in her chosen man's. That dream died on a Tuesday evening in October when he'd returned home early from a job site, mud still caked on his boots, only to find Victoria's BMW in the driveway alongside a silver Porsche he didn't recognize. The sounds from upstairs had painted a picture more vivid than any witness testimony. Ray had stood in his own foyer, listening to his wife's breathless moans mixing with a man's deeper groans, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. Not heartbreak, but a cold, calculating fury that settled into his bones like winter frost. He'd retreated to his study without a sound, poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon, and began planning. Raymond Thornfield didn't make impulsive decisions. Every successful project required careful surveying, precise measurements, and flawless execution. His marriage's destruction would be no different. The divorce proceedings had been brutal but necessary. Victoria's lawyer, a sharp-tongued woman named Patricia Holloway, had painted Ray as an absent workaholic who'd neglected his family's emotional needs. There was enough truth in the accusation to make it sting, but Ray's own attorney, the legendary Harold Pine, had been thorough in documenting Victoria's affair with Grant Holloway, Patricia's younger brother and a trust fund playboy who'd never worked an honest day in his life. The settlement had been fair by legal standards, but devastating to Ray's soul. Victoria received the house, half his assets, and substantial alimony. Worse yet, Emma had chosen to live with her mother, viewing Ray's discovery and subsequent divorce filing as a betrayal of family unity. The weekly dinners stopped. The phone calls became stilted, formal affairs. His daughter, once his greatest pride, now treated him like a distant relative obligated to attend family functions. Grant Holloway represented everything Ray despised about old money privilege. At 38, the man had coasted through life on his family's pharmaceutical fortune, collecting vintage cars and younger women with equal enthusiasm. He was handsome in that effortless way that came from good genes and expensive personal trainers, with silver-touched hair and the kind of confident smile that had never been tested by real adversity. Victoria had fallen for him completely, trading her construction king for a pharmaceutical prince without apparent regret. The engagement announcement had appeared in the social pages 6 months after the divorce was finalized. Victoria Thornfield would become Victoria Holloway, completing her ascension into Millbrook's upper echelon. The wedding was planned for the following spring, a lavish affair at the country club where Ray had never quite fit in despite his wealth. Ray had congratulated them both with grace that surprised even himself, shaking Grant's soft hand with his own work-hardened grip and kissing Victoria's cheek with practiced indifference. Inside, however, the machinery of revenge had already begun its patient, methodical work. Chapter 2. Blueprints for Retribution. The first phase of Ray's plan required him to become invisible, a ghost haunting the periphery of his former life, while gathering intelligence and establishing new alliances. He moved from his temporary downtown apartment into a modest ranch house in Riverside, a working-class neighborhood where his presence wouldn't raise eyebrows or generate gossip for Victoria's social circle. Emma's engagement to Timothy Walsh provided an unexpected opportunity. The announcement had stung. His daughter's engagement party, held at Victoria and Grant's newly purchased mansion, had been the first family gathering where Ray truly felt like an outsider. Victoria's parents, the Ashfords, had greeted him with the kind of polite coldness reserved for unwelcome relatives at holiday dinners. Her sister Caroline had made pointed comments about moving on and finding happiness again, each word carefully chosen to highlight his apparent failure to do either. But Emma's wedding would be different. As the bride's father, protocol demanded his presence and participation. More importantly, the guest list would include everyone who mattered in Millbrook's social hierarchy, the very people who'd watched his public humiliation with voyeuristic fascination. It would be the perfect stage for the final act of his carefully orchestrated revenge. The key to Ray's plan lay not in exposing Grant's past indiscretions, though they were numerous, but in creating a presence so devastating that the man's future would crumble under its weight. Ray spent months studying Grant's patterns, his weaknesses, his dependencies. The man was prideful above all else, dependent on social status and public perception to maintain his self-worth. He surrounded himself with sycophants and yes-men, people who fed his ego while carefully managing his more destructive impulses. Grant's relationship with Victoria was built on mutual benefit rather than genuine affection. She provided him with a sophisticated, accomplished woman to display at social functions, while he offered her the elevated status she'd always craved. It was a transaction disguised as romance, and like all transactions, it could be disrupted by changing the underlying economics. Ray's construction business provided perfect cover for his preparations. His crews worked throughout Millbrook County, giving him legitimate reasons to be anywhere he needed to gather information or position resources. His foremen were loyal men who'd worked for him for years, understanding without words that their boss was engaged in some kind of campaign that required discretion and absolute loyalty. The second phase involved establishing connections that would prove crucial when the time came to strike. Ray began attending county planning meetings, charity auctions, and business dinners he'd previously avoided. He cultivated relationships with people who'd previously been mere acquaintances. The police chief who'd grown up in Ray's old neighborhood, the county clerk whose husband worked for one of Ray's subcontractors, the federal prosecutor who'd played poker with Ray's late father decades ago. These weren't favors called in so much as debts acknowledged. Ray had built half the affordable housing in the county, employed hundreds of local workers, and donated quietly to dozens of community causes over the years. When he began having casual conversations about theoretical situations, what would happen if certain financial irregularities were discovered, how long federal investigations typically took, what kind of evidence prosecutors found most compelling, people were willing to provide information. The most crucial element of Ray's plan required him to swallow his pride and appear weak. He began declining social invitations, citing work pressures and health concerns. When he did appear in public, he looked tired, defeated, older than his years. He let his hair grow slightly too long and wore suits that needed pressing. The transformation was subtle, but noticeable to people who'd known him for years. Victoria's friends began describing him as pathetic and broken at dinner parties. Grant openly pitted him at the country club, making jokes about poor Ray and his inability to move on. Even Emma, during their increasingly rare phone conversations, expressed concern about his apparent decline. The performance was perfect because it contained enough truth to be believable. Ray was genuinely exhausted by the emotional toll of his planned revenge, and the loneliness was real even if its apparent cause was manufactured. By winter, Ray had become exactly what everyone expected him to be, a middle-aged man crushed by divorce and abandonment, going through the motions of life without real purpose or joy. It was a masterful bit of theater that would make his eventual resurrection all the more shocking. Chapter 3. The Architect's Final Gambit. Spring arrived early in Millbrook County, bringing with it the social season and Emma's wedding preparations. Ray maintained his facade of resigned acceptance while secretly accelerating the final phases of his plan. The wedding would take place at the Millbrook Country Club on the first Saturday in May, with over 300 guests expected to witness what society pages were already calling the event of the season. Ray's invitation had been delivered with careful formality. Emma had insisted he be included, though Victoria had clearly argued against it. The compromise was typically elegant. He would attend the ceremony and reception, but would not be part of the wedding party, and his role would be minimized throughout the festivities. He was to be a guest at his own daughter's wedding, watching from the sidelines while Grant's father walked Emma down the aisle in a symbolic merging of two established families. The slight was intentional and deeply personal, designed to underscore his diminished status in his daughter's life. Ray accepted it with the same gracious defeat he'd displayed for months, even sending a gracious note thanking Emma for including him despite the complicated family dynamics. The response had been perfect, wounded but understanding, proud but not bitter. Victoria had shown the note to several friends, using it as evidence of Ray's final acceptance of his reduced circumstances. What Victoria didn't know was that Ray had spent the winter months establishing a relationship that would fundamentally alter the evening's dynamics. Cassandra Montgomery had built her fortune in sustainable energy, transitioning from a successful environmental law practice to become one of the Southeast's most influential renewable power brokers. At 42, she was brilliant, beautiful, and utterly unimpressed by traditional social hierarchies. More importantly for Ray's purposes, she had her own reasons for wanting to see Grant Holloway brought low. Their meeting had been carefully orchestrated, but appeared entirely coincidental. Ray had accidentally encountered her at a renewable energy conference in Atlanta, where his construction company was exploring partnerships for eco-friendly residential developments. Their conversation had been professional initially, focusing on solar integration and geothermal systems, but had gradually expanded to include personal topics as their business relationship developed. Cass had been married to a pharmaceutical executive early in her career, a relationship that ended badly when she discovered her husband's involvement in a price-fixing scheme that had cost diabetic patients millions in unnecessary expenses. Her divorce had been followed by a relentless campaign to expose corruption in the pharmaceutical industry, making her numerous enemies among the old money families who'd profited from medical patents and government contracts. Grant's family had been peripheral targets in her investigations, but the connection was enough to create common ground between her and Ray. More importantly, Cass possessed the kind of commanding presence and social status that could shift power dynamics with her mere presence. When she walked into a room, conversation stopped and attention focused. She was exactly what Ray needed for his plan's dramatic climax. Their relationship had developed naturally over months of business meetings and carefully casual dinners. Ray had been honest about his divorce and his strained relationship with Emma, though he'd carefully omitted the depths of his planned revenge. Cass had shared her own struggles with family expectations and social pressures, creating genuine intimacy that surprised them both. By April, they were spending most weekends together, though Ray had been careful to keep their relationship private. Cass understood his desire for discretion, attributing it to his recent divorce and concerns about Emma's reaction. What she didn't fully grasp was that secrecy was essential to the psychological impact Ray intended to create at the wedding. The final piece of Ray's revenge required precise timing and flawless execution. He'd spent months identifying Grant's most vulnerable pressure points, mapping out dependencies and relationships that could be leveraged for maximum effect. The man's pride was his greatest weakness, but it was protected by layers of family money and social connections that made direct assault difficult. Instead, Ray had chosen a more sophisticated approach. Using his construction company's connections and Cass's renewable energy contacts, he'd quietly acquired controlling interests in several small companies that provided essential services to Grant's lifestyle. The exotic car dealership where he leased his Porsche collection, the private jet service he used for weekend trips, the exclusive spa where Victoria got her weekly treatments, even the catering company that provided food for their dinner parties. None of these acquisitions would be revealed until after the wedding, when Grant would begin experiencing a series of unfortunate service disruptions and contract complications. His lease applications would be rejected for mysterious credit concerns. His spa appointments would be canceled due to scheduling conflicts. His favorite restaurants would suddenly have no available reservations. The death would come by 1,000 small cuts, each one professionally plausible and legally unassailable. But the wedding itself would provide the psychological foundation for everything that followed. When Cass walked into that reception, took Ray's hand, and demonstrated his continued power to attract remarkable women, she would shatter the narrative of his defeat that Victoria and Grant had so carefully constructed. The revelation that he'd been playing a deeper game all along would reframe every interaction they'd had over the past year, transforming apparent weakness into calculated deception. Ray spent the week before the wedding making final preparations, confirming that every element of his plan was in place. He'd reserved a suite at the downtown Marriott for the wedding night, ostensibly because driving home after the reception would be impractical. In reality, he wanted to be close to Emma in case she needed him after the evening's revelations played out. The rehearsal dinner had been a small family affair that Ray attended alone, sitting quietly at a corner table while Victoria and Grant held court with their chosen family members. Emma had looked beautiful but tired, the stress of wedding planning evident in the tightness around her eyes. She'd hugged him briefly when he arrived and thanked him for coming, but their conversation had been stilted and formal. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart," Ray had told her as the evening wound down. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that you're the best thing I've ever accomplished." Emma had looked puzzled by the intensity in his voice, but she'd squeezed his hand and smiled. "Thanks, Dad. I love you too." It would be the last simple moment between them for a very long time. Chapter 4. The Theater of Humiliation. The morning of Emma's wedding arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather that event planners dream about. Clear skies, gentle breeze, temperature hovering at a comfortable 72 degrees. Ray woke in his hotel suite at dawn, muscles tense with anticipation despite his careful preparations. Today would either vindicate months of planning or expose him as a fool consumed by petty vengeance. He dressed carefully in his charcoal gray suit, the one Emma had helped him pick out during their last shopping trip together before the divorce. The The memory stung, but he pushed it aside. Sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford today. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock, with cocktails beginning immediately afterward and dinner to follow at 6. Ray had deliberately arrived at the country club early, ostensibly to help with last-minute preparations, but actually to observe the setup and ensure his own arrangements were in place. The staff treated him with the polite deference due a paying member, though he noticed several meaningful glances exchanged between servers who clearly knew about his changed circumstances. Victoria looked radiant as she supervised final decorating touches, her blonde hair swept up in an elegant chignon that showcased the diamond earrings Grant had given her for her birthday. She wore a champagne-colored dress that managed to be stunning without upstaging the bride, and Ray felt a familiar pang at seeing the woman he'd once loved looking so genuinely happy. That happiness was built on the wreckage of their marriage, but he had to admit she wore it well. Grant appeared at her elbow, resplendent in his morning coat and already showing signs of pre-ceremony champagne consumption. He kissed Victoria's cheek possessively, a gesture clearly intended for Ray's benefit, then approached with the kind of magnanimous smile wealthy men reserve for defeated rivals. "Ray, glad you could make it, old man. Emma will be thrilled to have her father here." The words were perfectly chosen, acknowledging Ray's paternal role while emphasizing that it was Emma's generosity, not family obligation, that secured his invitation. "Wouldn't miss it," Ray replied, matching Grant's tone exactly. "Emma looks beautiful. You and Victoria have done a wonderful job with the preparations." The compliment was calculated to sting, crediting Victoria and Grant as a team, while positioning Ray as an outsider observer. Grant's smile widened, enjoying what he interpreted as submission. "Victoria has exquisite taste," Grant agreed. "We make quite a team, don't we, darling?" Victoria joined them, slipping her arm through Grant's with practiced ease. "The flowers turn out perfectly," she said, addressing both men, but focusing her attention on Grant. "I was worried about the peonies, but they're absolutely gorgeous." Ray nodded appreciatively, playing his assigned role as the gracious ex-husband grateful to be included. Inside, he cataloged every slight, every casual dismissal, every assumption about his diminished status. The fuel for his anger burned cold and steady, a controlled flame that would soon consume everything in its path. The other guests began arriving around 3:30, Millbrook's social elite dressed in their finest and buzzing with excitement about the wedding of the year. Ray recognized most faces from various charity events and business dinners over the years, though the reception he received was notably cooler than in the past. Several people who'd once sought his company for potential business opportunities now offered perfunctory greetings before moving on to more promising conversations. Emma's appearance at 3:45 silenced the chattering crowd. Ray's daughter looked stunning in her grandmother's vintage lace gown, her dark hair swept back to showcase the pearl necklace that had been Ray's wedding gift to Victoria 22 years earlier. The sight of those pearls around his daughter's throat nearly broke his carefully maintained composure, but he steadied himself by focusing on the larger purpose. Emma approached him with obvious nervousness, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her veil. "Dad, I'm so glad you're here. I know this is complicated." "Nothing's complicated about today, sweetheart," Ray assured her, kissing her forehead gently. "Today is about you and Timothy, and your happiness is all that matters to me." She squeezed his hand gratefully, then hesitated. "I wanted to tell you, Grant's father is going to walk me down the aisle. Mom thought it would be less awkward for everyone, given the circumstances." The words hit Ray like a physical blow, though he'd been expecting them. Victoria's final insult, delivered through their daughter's reluctant voice. He forced his expression to remain calm, even understanding. "Of course," he said quietly. "Whatever makes you most comfortable. I'll be cheering you on from the audience." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Dad. I really am. Don't apologize for anything today," Ray told her firmly. "This is your day. Be happy." The ceremony itself was a masterpiece of traditional elegance. Timothy's father, a distinguished banker with silver hair and patrician features, walked Emma down the aisle with appropriate dignity while Ray watched from the third row, positioned behind Victoria's extended family and Grant's pharmaceutical dynasty relatives. The symbolism was crystal clear to everyone present. Ray Thornfield had been replaced in his daughter's life by men of greater substance and stability. Victoria dabbed at her eyes during the vows, Grant's arm around her shoulders in a display of supportive intimacy. Several guests glanced back at Ray, some with pity, others with the kind of morbid curiosity reserved for public humiliation. He accepted their attention with apparent grace, playing the role of the dignified loser who'd learned to accept his reduced circumstances. The cocktail hour began immediately after the ceremony, with guests mingling on the club's terrace overlooking the 18th green. Ray found himself gravitating toward a corner table, nursing a whiskey and declining invitations to join various conversations. His isolation was both genuine and strategic. He needed to appear wounded but not bitter, defeated but not dangerous. That's when Victoria's sister Caroline approached with her husband Richard, both of them slightly drunk and emboldened by the day's festivities. Caroline had never liked Ray, viewing him as beneath her sister's social aspirations, and the divorce had given her permission to express opinions she'd previously kept private. "Ray, darling," she said with false sweetness, "you look lonely over here all by yourself. Didn't you bring a date?" The question was loud enough to attract attention from nearby guests, exactly as Caroline intended. Richard smirked beside his wife, clearly enjoying the sport of baiting a man who couldn't fight back without ruining his daughter's wedding. "I'm fine, Caroline," Ray replied evenly. "Just enjoying the view." "Oh, but surely you could have found someone to accompany you," Caroline pressed. "I mean, you're still reasonably attractive for a man your age, and that construction money must count for something." The insult was delivered with a bright smile that made it even more cutting. Several guests had stopped their own conversations to listen, sensing drama in the making. Ray felt the familiar cold fury rising in his chest, but he maintained his composure. "I prefer my own company these days," he said calmly. "Simpler that way." Caroline laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Oh, honey, you don't have to pretend with us. We all know this must be difficult, seeing Victoria so happy with Grant. They make such a perfect couple, don't they?" The words hung in the air like a challenge. Ray could feel the weight of watching eyes, the anticipation of his response. This was the moment Victoria's family had been building toward all evening, the final humiliation of Raymond Thornfield, delivered in front of everyone who mattered in their social circle. Ray smiled, an expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Victoria deserves to be happy," he said quietly. "We all do." It was exactly the response Caroline had hoped for. Gracious defeat from a broken man who knew his place. She turned to Richard with satisfaction, missing the dangerous glitter in Ray's eyes that a more perceptive observer might have recognized as anticipation rather than resignation. The trap was set. All that remained was for his prey to walk into it. Chapter 5. The Queen's Gambit. At 7:15, just as the dinner service was beginning and evening speeches were scheduled to commence, the country club's main doors swept open with dramatic timing that seemed choreographed. Conversations faltered and heads turned as Cassandra Montgomery entered the reception hall, and Ray felt a surge of satisfaction at the collective intake of breath from the assembled guests. Cass was magnificent. She wore a midnight blue gown that hugged her athletic figure while remaining tastefully elegant, her auburn hair styled in loose waves that framed her striking features. But it was her presence more than her appearance that commanded attention. The confident stride, the slight smile that suggested she was privy to secrets others could only guess at, the way she surveyed the room like a general assessing a battlefield. Ray rose from his corner table as she approached, and the simple gesture transformed the entire dynamic of the evening. Where moments before he'd appeared isolated and defeated, he now stood with obvious anticipation and genuine pleasure. The change was subtle but unmistakable to anyone who'd been watching him throughout the evening. "Sorry I'm late, love," Cass said as she reached him, her voice carrying just far enough to be heard by the nearest tables. She kissed his cheek with comfortable familiarity, then slipped her hand through his arm with the ease of established intimacy. The effect was electric. Conversations stopped entirely as 300 guests processed the implications of what they were witnessing. Raymond Thornfield, the supposedly broken construction king, was not only accompanied by a stunning woman, but by one whose presence at the country club could only mean she was someone of considerable importance. Victoria's face had gone pale, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips as she stared across the room. Grant's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching alarm as he recognized the potential threat to his evening's narrative. Caroline's mouth hung open in unbecoming shock, her earlier confidence evaporating like morning mist. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ray said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room with the authority of a man accustomed to commanding construction sites. "I'd like you to meet Cassandra Montgomery." The name rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Cassandra Montgomery, the renewable energy mogul, the woman whose company had just signed a $2 billion contract with the state, the billionaire who'd appeared on the cover of Forbes 6 months earlier as one of the Southeast's most influential business leaders. Her presence at Emma's wedding wasn't just unexpected, it was earth-shaking. Cass smiled graciously at the assembled guests, completely at ease with being the center of attention. "Thank you all for letting me crash the party," she said with charming self-deprecation. "I couldn't miss celebrating Emma's special day, especially after hearing so much about her from Ray." The implication was clear and devastating. Ray and Cass had been together long enough for him to share details about his daughter's wedding. This wasn't a casual date or a desperate attempt to appear successful. This was a relationship with depth and duration that had been carefully hidden from Millbrook's social observers. Emma appeared at Ray's side, her bridal glow enhanced by obvious curiosity and delight. "Dad, you didn't tell me you were bringing someone." "I wanted it to be a surprise," Ray said, his arm tightening around Cass's waist with possessive pride. "Emma, this is Cass. Cass, this is my daughter Emma, the most beautiful bride in Georgia." Cass embraced Emma warmly, every gesture speaking to genuine affection rather than polite formality. "Your father talks about you constantly," she told Emma. "I feel like I know you already. Congratulations on your marriage. Timothy is a lucky man." The conversation continued for several minutes, with other guests gradually gravitating closer to catch details of the exchange. What became clear to everyone listening was that Ray and Cass shared the easy intimacy of a couple who'd moved beyond initial attraction into genuine partnership. They finished each other's sentences, shared private jokes, and displayed the kind of comfortable physical connection that couldn't be faked. Victoria finally approached, Grant trailing behind her with obvious reluctance. Up close, the contrast between the two women was even more striking. Victoria's manufactured elegance versus Cass's natural confidence. Practiced social grace versus authentic warmth. "I don't believe we've met," Victoria said to Cass, her voice carefully controlled. "I'm Victoria, Emma's mother." "Of course," Cass replied warmly. "Ray's told me so much about you. You've done a beautiful job with the wedding preparations." The compliment was perfectly pitched, acknowledging Victoria's role while subtly emphasizing that Ray had been discussing his ex-wife with his new partner. Victoria's smile grew strained as she processed the implications. Grant stepped forward with forced bonhomie. "Grant Holloway," he said, extending his hand. "Any friend of Ray's is welcome here." Cass shook his hand briefly, her expression cooling slightly. "Mr. Holloway, your family's pharmaceutical company, Holloway Therapeutics, isn't it?" Grant nodded, clearly pleased to be recognized. "That's right. Been in the family for 3 generations now." "Interesting," Cass said neutrally. "I followed some of your industry's regulatory challenges recently. Fascinating business model." The comment was delivered with such apparent innocence that Grant completely missed its cutting edge. Victoria, however, was sharper. She recognized the subtle threat in Cass's tone and began steering Grant away from what could become dangerous territory. "We should let the happy couple enjoy their evening," Victoria said quickly. "So nice to meet you, Cassandra." As they moved away, Ray caught Caroline's eye across the room. His sister-in-law looked as though she'd bitten into something sour, her earlier triumphant expression replaced by obvious dismay. The woman who'd spent the afternoon positioning Ray as a pathetic figure now faced the reality that she'd been completely wrong about his circumstances. The evening's momentum had shifted completely. Where Ray had previously been ignored or pitted, he was now the subject of intense curiosity and renewed interest. Business leaders who'd written him off after the divorce began approaching with renewed respect, suddenly remembering profitable partnerships and mutual acquaintances. The transformation was both immediate and profound. But Ray's greatest satisfaction came from watching Emma throughout the evening. His daughter's initial surprise had given way to obvious delight at seeing her father happy and successful. She made a point of introducing Cass to her friends, beaming with pride as she described her father's wonderful girlfriend to anyone who would listen. "Dad," Emma whispered during a quiet moment, "she's amazing. How long have you been together?" "A few months," Ray replied honestly. "I wanted to be sure it was serious before introducing her to family." Emma hugged him tightly. "I'm so happy for you. You deserve this." The words were exactly what Ray had hoped to hear, but they also carried an unexpected weight of genuine emotion. His daughter's approval mattered more than he'd realized, and seeing her joy at his apparent happiness created a complex mixture of satisfaction and guilt that he hadn't anticipated. The evening's speeches proceeded with Cass at Ray's side, her presence transforming his status from pitted outsider to envied success story. When Timothy's father toasted the union of two families, Ray felt Cass squeeze his hand supportively. When Emma raised her glass to thank everyone for sharing their special day, she made a point of acknowledging both her parents and their partners, giving Ray equal standing with Victoria for the first time since the divorce. But the evening's most telling moment came during the father-daughter dance. Timothy's father had performed the traditional first dance with Emma, but when the music changed to a song Ray recognized as one of Emma's childhood favorites, she crossed the dance floor and extended her hand to him. "I believe this dance belongs to you, Dad," she said simply. As Ray swept his daughter around the dance floor, he felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes watching their reunion. The symbolism was powerful and unmistakable. Emma was publicly reclaiming her relationship with her father, acknowledging his continued importance in her life despite the previous year's estrangement. Victoria watched from the sidelines, her face a careful mask that couldn't quite hide her growing unease. Grant stood beside her, his earlier confidence replaced by obvious confusion about how the evening's dynamics had shifted so dramatically. They planned a wedding that would showcase their social triumph and Ray's defeat, but instead found themselves witnessing his resurrection. As the evening wound toward its conclusion, Ray felt a deep satisfaction settling in his chest. The first phase of his revenge was complete, and it had exceeded his expectations. But this was only the beginning. The real destruction of Grant Holloway's carefully constructed life would unfold over the weeks and months to come, each element precisely timed for maximum psychological impact. The theater of humiliation had become the theater of triumph, but Ray's performance was far from over. Chapter 6: The Web Titans. The morning after Emma's wedding brought a flood of phone calls and messages that confirmed the success of Ray's first major gambit. Social media buzzed with photos of him and Cass at the reception, accompanied by breathless speculation about their relationship and its implications for Millbrook's social hierarchy. The narrative of Ray's defeat had been shattered in a single evening, replaced by curiosity about his apparent romantic and financial recovery. Ray fielded congratulatory calls from business associates who distanced themselves after the divorce, each conversation revealing how quickly allegiances could shift when circumstances changed. The construction king was back, and everyone wanted to ensure they remained in his good graces. The transformation was both gratifying and deeply cynical, confirming Ray's long-standing belief that loyalty was a luxury few could afford. Emma called around noon, her voice bright with happiness. "Dad, I can't stop thinking about last night. Cass is wonderful, and seeing you so happy made everything perfect. Mom even said she was glad you'd found someone special." The comment about Victoria was particularly interesting. His ex-wife was already working to position herself favorably in light of changed circumstances. Ray filed the information away for future use, while focusing on his daughter's continued joy. I'm glad you approve, sweetheart. Cass was charmed by you, as I knew she would be. She's looking forward to getting to know you better. They talked for another 10 minutes about wedding highlights and honeymoon plans, their conversation flowing with an ease that had been absent for months. Emma's obvious relief at seeing her father successful and supported tugged at Ray's conscience. But he pushed the feeling aside. His daughter's happiness was important, but it couldn't be allowed to interfere with a larger campaign for justice. Cass arrived at his house that afternoon, having spent the morning fielding her own calls from curious business contacts who'd learned about her relationship with Ray. She seemed amused by the attention rather than bothered, settling into his kitchen with the comfortable familiarity of someone who belonged there. Your ex-wife's family looked like they'd swallowed broken glass, she observed with satisfaction. Particularly that sister of hers, Caroline. I thought she might actually faint when you introduced me. Ray poured coffee for both of them, enjoying the memory of Caroline's stricken expression. Caroline's always enjoyed being the bearer of bad news about other people's lives. Last night was probably the first time she's been wrong about anything since high school. They spent the afternoon reviewing the evening's success while discussing the next phases of Ray's plan. Cass had agreed to participate in his revenge scheme after learning about Grant's family connections to pharmaceutical price-fixing scandals that had personally affected her own relatives. Her support was both strategic and emotional, making her a perfect partner for the campaign ahead. The service disruptions begin tomorrow, Ray told her. Grant's going to discover that several companies he depends on are suddenly experiencing policy changes that affect his accounts. Nothing dramatic initially, just inconveniences that will begin accumulating. Cass nodded approvingly. The car dealership first? His Porsche lease is up for renewal next week. They'll discover some irregularities in his credit history that require additional review. Could take months to resolve, unfortunately. The smile that crossed Cass's face was genuinely wicked. I almost feel sorry for him. Almost. Over the following days, Ray's plan began unfolding with clockwork precision. Grant's first indication that something had changed came Tuesday morning when his lease renewal application was rejected pending enhanced financial verification procedures. The Porsche dealership's manager, a man named Frank who'd known Grant for years, seemed genuinely puzzled by the corporate directive, but was powerless to override it. Grant's second shock came Thursday when his private jet service canceled his weekend trip to Martha's Vineyard, citing aircraft maintenance requirements that would ground his usual plane indefinitely. Alternative aircraft were available, of course, but at rates nearly triple his usual charges. The increase was presented as temporary market adjustments, but no timeline was provided for when normal pricing might resume. By the following week, Grant's favorite restaurant had no availability for his customary Friday night table. His spa had canceled Victoria's standing appointments due to scheduling conflicts with renovations that seemed to have no firm completion date. His country club's golf pro had suddenly become unavailable for their weekly lessons, citing a full schedule that showed no signs of opening up. Each disruption was professionally handled and legally unassailable. The companies involved offered sincere apologies and promises to resolve issues as quickly as possible, but bureaucratic delays seemed to plague every attempted solution. Grant found himself trapped in a web of minor inconveniences that collectively threatened to unravel the lifestyle he'd taken for granted. Victoria began expressing concern about the pattern of problems affecting their service providers. It's the strangest thing, she told Grant over dinner at a restaurant they'd never visited before. Their usual place had mysteriously lost their reservation and had no availability for the next 6 weeks. It's like we've been blacklisted by every company we use regularly. Grant's response revealed both his growing paranoia and his fundamental ignorance of how business relationships actually worked. Maybe it's Ray, he suggested darkly. He probably has connections throughout the county through his construction business. Victoria dismissed the theory immediately. Ray's been nothing but gracious since the wedding. Besides, he's completely focused on his new girlfriend now. Did you see the photos from the charity auction? They looked very happy together. The charity auction had been another carefully orchestrated appearance by Ray and Cass, designed to reinforce their relationship's public profile while demonstrating Ray's continued social relevance. They donated generously to several causes and have been photographed with community leaders who've been eager to cultivate connections with both the construction magnate and the renewable energy mogul. Grant's growing frustration began affecting his behavior in ways that created additional problems. His attempts to resolve service issues often devolved into angry confrontations with customer service representatives who were simply following corporate policies they didn't understand. Word began spreading through Millbrook's service community that Grant Holloway had become difficult to work with, creating a reputational snowball effect that compounded his original problems. The psychological pressure was exactly what Ray had hoped to achieve. Grant's identity was built on effortless privilege and social dominance, both of which required the smooth functioning of systems he'd never had to think about before. When those systems began failing simultaneously, his confidence began cracking in ways that were visible to everyone around him. Victoria's patients also began showing strain as their social calendar became increasingly complicated by service disruptions and availability issues. The woman who traded up from Ray's construction money lifestyle to Grant's pharmaceutical fortune elegance found herself dealing with problems she'd never encountered during her previous marriage. Ray had been hands-on with service providers, building personal relationships that ensured reliable performance. Grant had always simply expected things to work, and when they didn't, he had no foundation for effective problem-solving. The irony wasn't lost on Ray that his revenge was succeeding by demonstrating exactly the kinds of practical competencies that Victoria had once dismissed as beneath her social aspirations. Grant's privileged background had left him unprepared for the mundane challenges of making systems work when they stopped functioning automatically. By month's end, Grant had begun displaying the same kind of stress behavior that Ray had faked during his apparent post-divorce decline. The difference was that Grant's distress was entirely genuine, born of real problems he couldn't solve, and a growing sense that forces beyond his control were undermining his carefully constructed life. Ray watched the deterioration with cold satisfaction, knowing that the worst was yet to come. The service disruptions were merely the opening movement of a symphony of destruction that would crescendo over the coming months. Grant Holloway had spent his life coasting on inherited advantages, never learning the skills necessary to survive when those advantages were stripped away. The education was about to begin in earnest. Chapter 7. The Reckoning Begins. 3 months after Emma's wedding, Grant Holloway's world had transformed from privileged ease to constant stress. What had initially seemed like a series of unfortunate coincidences had evolved into a sustained campaign of professional and personal sabotage that was beginning to affect every aspect of his daily life. The car situation had become particularly humiliating. After his Porsche lease was denied, Grant had attempted to purchase a vehicle outright, only to discover that his credit score had mysteriously plummeted due to irregular reporting patterns from financial institutions he'd never done business with. The luxury dealerships that had once courted his business now treated him with polite skepticism, requiring down payments and verification procedures typically reserved for customers with questionable finances. Victoria's growing irritation was becoming harder to hide. The woman who'd married Grant for the elevated lifestyle he represented found herself dealing with the kind of mundane problems she'd expected to leave behind forever. Her friends had begun making subtle comments about the couple's apparent financial difficulties, observations that stung particularly deeply because they came from people Victoria had once looked down upon during her marriage to Ray. "Maybe we should consider moving," Victoria suggested during one of their increasingly tense dinner conversations. "A change of scenery might help us start fresh." Grant's reaction was swift and defensive. "We're not running away because of some temporary service problems. This is our home, our social circle. I won't be driven out by whatever's causing these issues." The statement revealed Grant's growing paranoia and his inability to accept that his problems might be the result of someone else's deliberate action. His pharmaceutical fortune had insulated him from real adversity for so long that he genuinely couldn't conceive of someone possessing both the motivation and capability to orchestrate such a comprehensive campaign against him. Ray, meanwhile, had been carefully documenting every aspect of Grant's deterioration through a network of informants and business connections. His construction crews worked throughout the county, providing natural opportunities to gather intelligence about Grant's daily struggles. The picture that emerged was of a man slowly coming apart under pressures he'd never learned to handle. The next phase of Ray's plan required more direct action. Using shell companies and intermediary partnerships, he began targeting Grant's social standing through the institutions that mattered most to Millbrook's elite community. The country club where Grant had held membership for 15 years suddenly discovered irregularities in his account history that required extensive review. His membership at the exclusive yacht club was suspended pending resolution of administrative concerns that seemed to multiply rather than resolve over time. Most damaging of all, Grant's charitable commitments began falling through due to organizational restructuring at the foundations where he'd served on boards for years. The pharmaceutical fortune that had guaranteed his welcome at charity galas and fundraising dinners was suddenly insufficient to maintain his social positions when questions arose about his recent financial volatility. Victoria's response to their social exile was to blame Grant's handling of their problems rather than the problems themselves. "You're being too aggressive with these people," she told him after his latest confrontation with a country club administrator. "Whatever's happening, we need to handle it diplomatically, not like some kind of war." Grant's explosion was predictable and revealing. "This is a war. Someone is deliberately targeting us, and you're worried about being diplomatic? We need to fight back, not roll over and accept it." The argument escalated into their first serious fight since getting married, with Victoria storming out to spend the night at her sister Caroline's house. The separation was brief, but symbolically significant. For the first time, Victoria was questioning whether her upgrade from Ray to Grant had been as advantageous as she'd originally believed. Ray learned about the fight through Caroline herself, who called him unexpectedly after Victoria's overnight visit. The conversation was awkward but illuminating, revealing that Victoria's family was beginning to reassess their treatment of Ray in light of his apparent success with Cass and Grant's visible struggles. "I may have misjudged you at the wedding," Caroline admitted with obvious reluctance. "Victoria says you've been nothing but supportive about Emma, and clearly you've landed on your feet with your new relationship." Ray accepted the apology graciously while internally cataloging its implications. Victoria's family was beginning to hedge their bets, maintaining relationships that might prove valuable if Grant's apparent decline continued. The shift in allegiances was both predictable and useful for Ray's long-term objectives. Emma's perspective on the situation was more concerning. His daughter had noticed Grant's obvious stress during family dinners and had begun asking questions about what might be causing his difficulties. Her natural empathy made her sympathetic to Grant's struggles, even though she didn't particularly like him as a person. "Dad, have you noticed anything strange about Grant lately?" Emma asked during one of their regular lunch meetings. "He seems really stressed about something, and Mom's starting to get worried." Ray chose his words carefully. "Business can be challenging sometimes. I'm sure whatever's bothering him will work itself out eventually." The reassurance was technically truthful while avoiding any mention of his own role in Grant's problems. Emma seemed satisfied with the explanation, though Ray noticed she was paying closer attention to the dynamics within her mother's household. The fourth month brought Grant's first major public humiliation. His pharmaceutical company's annual charity gala, an event he'd personally hosted for the past decade, was canceled due to unforeseen logistical complications that made the planned venue unavailable. Alternative venues were either booked or demanded deposits that Grant's currently frozen accounts couldn't provide. The cancellation sent ripples through Millbrook's social community, marking the first time in years that the Holloway family had failed to deliver on a major social commitment. Grant's attempts to explain the situation only made things worse, as his increasingly paranoid theories about deliberate sabotage made him sound unstable to people who'd known him for years. Victoria's patience finally snapped completely during the aftermath of the gala cancellation. "This is becoming embarrassing," she told Grant during a confrontation that was overheard by their housekeeper and quickly spread through the domestic staff network that served Millbrook's wealthy families. Whatever's causing these problems, you need to fix it or find someone who can. Grant's response revealed the full extent of his psychological deterioration. You think this is my fault? You think I'm somehow responsible for every business we deal with suddenly changing their policies? Someone is doing this to us, and until you accept that reality, we can't fight back effectively. The accusation that Victoria was somehow complicit in their problems marked a new low in their relationship. For the first time since their marriage, Victoria began openly questioning whether Grant possessed the competence and stability she'd expected when she'd chosen him over Ray. Ray observed these developments with deep satisfaction, knowing that the psychological foundation of Grant's life was beginning to crumble exactly as planned. The man who'd stolen his wife was discovering that privilege without substance was a house built on sand, vulnerable to any sustained pressure applied with intelligence and determination. But Ray's greatest satisfaction came from an unexpected source: Emma's growing respect for his apparent resilience and success. His daughter had begun seeking his advice on various matters, treating him as a source of wisdom rather than the defeated figure she'd pitted after the divorce. The relationship they were rebuilding was based on genuine mutual respect rather than obligation, creating something stronger than what they'd shared before Victoria's betrayal. The trap Ray had spent months constructing was finally beginning to close around its intended prey. Chapter 8: The Avalanche. By the 6th month following Emma's wedding, Grant Holloway's carefully constructed life had collapsed into barely controlled chaos. The systematic destruction of his support network had accelerated beyond even Ray's expectations, creating a cascade of failures that fed on themselves with increasing momentum. The breaking point came when Grant's pharmaceutical company board called an emergency meeting to address concerns about his recent behavioral patterns and their potential impact on corporate reputation. His increasingly erratic responses to business challenges, combined with his paranoid accusations about coordinated sabotage, had begun affecting relationships with key partners and regulatory agencies. Grant's presentation to the board was a disaster that cemented his reputation for instability. Instead of addressing specific business concerns, he launched into a rambling conspiracy theory about business rivals and personal enemies who were supposedly coordinating attacks on his lifestyle and social standing. The pharmaceutical executives listened with growing alarm as their colleague described elaborate plots involving credit agencies, service providers, and social institutions. Grant interrupted board chairman Walter Phillips, a family friend for 3 decades. What you're describing sounds like the product of significant stress. Perhaps you should consider taking some time away from daily operations to address whatever's affecting your judgment. The suggestion of enforced leave was the final straw for Grant's composure. His explosion during the board meeting included personal attacks on colleagues who'd supported him for years, wild accusations about their potential involvement in his problems, and threats of legal action against anyone who attempted to remove him from corporate leadership. The meeting ended with Grant's immediate suspension from all company duties, pending a comprehensive review of his fitness for executive responsibilities. The pharmaceutical fortune that had defined his identity and supported his lifestyle was suddenly beyond his reach, frozen by board action until psychological evaluation could be completed. Victoria learned about Grant's corporate suspension through Caroline, who'd heard the news through her husband Richard's business connections. The revelation that Grant's problems extended beyond inconvenient service disruptions into serious questions about his mental stability forced Victoria to confront realities she'd been trying to ignore for months. "This can't continue," Victoria told Grant during the confrontation that followed his return from the disastrous board meeting. "Whatever's happening to you, whatever's causing these problems, we need professional help to address it." Grant's response was entirely predictable and deeply revealing. Rather than acknowledging his deteriorating situation, he doubled down on conspiracy theories while adding Victoria herself to his list of potential enemies. "Maybe you're part of it," he said with genuine suspicion. "Maybe you've been in contact with Ray, coordinating this whole campaign. You certainly seem eager to distance yourself from me whenever problems arise. The accusation that Victoria was secretly collaborating with her ex-husband to destroy her current marriage crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. For the first time since their relationship began, Victoria saw Grant not as a sophisticated partner, but as a paranoid man whose grip on reality was becoming dangerously tenuous. "I'm going to stay with Caroline for a few days," Victoria announced with cold finality. "When you're ready to discuss this situation rationally, without wild theories and personal attacks, we can talk about next steps." Victoria's departure marked the beginning of Grant's complete social isolation. His pharmaceutical company colleagues avoided him following the board meeting debacle. His country club membership had been permanently revoked due to conduct incompatible with club standards. His few remaining friends found his increasingly erratic behavior exhausting and embarrassing. Ray monitored these developments through his network of informants while maintaining careful distance from any direct involvement. Grant's psychological collapse was proceeding exactly as planned, but Ray needed to ensure that no evidence could connect him to the systematic campaign that had triggered it. Emma's reaction to Grant's visible deterioration was complex and troubling. Her natural compassion made her sympathetic to anyone experiencing obvious distress, even someone she'd never particularly liked. During a lunch with Ray, she expressed concern about her mother's situation and asked whether Ray thought she should offer support. "That's between you and your mother, sweetheart," Ray replied carefully. Family relationships are complicated, especially when they involve someone who's clearly struggling with serious problems. Emma studied her father's face with the sharp intelligence she'd inherited from both parents. "You don't seem very surprised by what's happening to Grant. Most people are shocked by how quickly things have fallen apart for him." The observation was perceptive and potentially dangerous. Ray had been careful to express appropriate concern about Grant's difficulties without showing excessive interest in their details. Emma's question suggested she might be beginning to suspect connections that could compromise Ray's careful planning. "I've seen what stress can do to successful people," Ray said truthfully. "Sometimes when everything in someone's life depends on systems working perfectly, any disruption can create cascading problems that become overwhelming." The explanation satisfied Emma's immediate curiosity while reinforcing Ray's image as someone with hard-won wisdom about business pressures. She seemed reassured by his apparent insight, rather than suspicious of his knowledge. Grant's final public humiliation came during Millbrook's annual charity auction, an event he'd co-chaired for the past 5 years. His absence from the planning committee had been awkward, but manageable. But his unexpected appearance at the auction itself created a scene that became legendary in local social circles. Grant arrived at the event obviously intoxicated and immediately began confronting other attendees about their potential involvement in his persecution. He accused the auction organizers of deliberately excluding him from leadership roles, demanded explanations from business rivals about their coordinated campaign against him, and generally created such a disturbance that security was called to escort him from the premises. The spectacle was witnessed by 300 of Millbrook's most influential residents, including many who'd known Grant for decades. His transformation from sophisticated pharmaceutical executive to paranoid conspiracy theorist was complete and irreversible, marking his permanent exile from the social circles that had once defined his identity. Victoria filed for divorce the following Monday, citing irreconcilable differences and requesting immediate separation of assets. Her petition included detailed documentation of Grant's recent behavior, creating a legal record that would make any reconciliation impossible even if his mental state improved. Ray learned about the divorce filing through Harold Pine, his own attorney, who'd been contacted by Victoria's lawyer about potential complications involving shared social connections. The conversation was brief and professional, but Ray detected satisfaction in Harold's voice as he reported Grant's complete downfall. "Couldn't have happened to a more deserving person," Harold observed with uncharacteristic emotion. "Some people need to learn that actions have consequences, even if those consequences take time to develop." Ray's response was carefully neutral, expressing appropriate concern for Emma's welfare while avoiding any comment that might suggest personal involvement in Grant's destruction. But inside, he felt the deep satisfaction of a master craftsman whose complex project had achieved perfect execution. Grant Holloway had been systematically stripped of everything that mattered to him: his business reputation, his social standing, his marriage, and ultimately his sanity. The man who'd stolen Ray's wife and mocked his apparent weakness had been revealed as fundamentally hollow, dependent on external supports that could be removed by someone with sufficient determination and strategic intelligence. The campaign for justice was nearly complete. Only the final act remained. Chapter 9. The Master's Victory. 1 year after Emma's wedding, Raymond Thornfield stood in his newly completed lakefront home, watching the sun set over waters that reflected his ultimate triumph. The house was a masterpiece of modern architecture integrated with natural surroundings, showcasing both his construction expertise and his renewed prosperity. Every detail had been personally supervised, from the imported Italian marble to the sustainably harvested hardwood floors that Cass had insisted upon. Grant Holloway, meanwhile, had been committed to a private psychiatric facility following a complete psychological breakdown that culminated in his arrest for public intoxication and disturbing the peace outside Victoria's new apartment. The pharmaceutical fortune was tied up in legal proceedings that would likely continue for years, with Grant's competency to manage his own affairs under formal challenge by family members who'd grown tired of his increasingly erratic behavior. Victoria's divorce had been finalized with remarkable speed, aided by comprehensive documentation of Grant's mental instability and her attorney's skillful navigation of complex asset division issues. She'd emerged from a marriage with enough money to maintain a comfortable lifestyle, though far from the elevated social status she'd once enjoyed as Grant's wife. The most satisfying development for Ray was Emma's complete reconciliation with her father. His daughter had gradually come to understand that Ray's apparent weakness following the divorce had been a carefully managed transition rather than genuine defeat. She'd begun asking probing questions about his business strategies and personal philosophy, developing genuine respect for his resilience and strategic thinking. "You never gave up, did you, Dad?" Emma asked during one of their weekly dinners at Ray's new house. "Even when everyone thought you were finished, you were planning something." Ray chose his words carefully, maintaining the fiction that his recovery had been organic rather than orchestrated. "I learned that sometimes you have to let people underestimate you. It gives you freedom to work without interference." Emma nodded thoughtfully, her sharp intelligence processing implications that Ray hoped she wouldn't pursue too far. His daughter was becoming a formidable attorney in her own right, with instincts that might eventually lead her to uncomfortable questions about Grant's systematic destruction. Cass emerged from the kitchen carrying a bottle of wine and settling beside Ray with the comfortable ease of established partnership. Their relationship had evolved far beyond its origins as a strategic alliance, developing in a genuine affection that surprised them both with its depth and durability. "Grant's been asking for visitors," Cass mentioned casually. "The facility called Victoria, but she's refused to see him. Apparently he's convinced that you're somehow responsible for his problems." Ray's smile was cold with satisfaction. Grant's always been better at assigning blame than accepting responsibility. Mental illness is a terrible thing, but it doesn't excuse the choices he made before his breakdown. The observation was technically accurate while avoiding any acknowledgement of Ray's actual role in Grant's downfall. Even Cass, who'd participated in aspects of the campaign, didn't know the full scope of Ray's planning or the intricate coordination required to achieve such comprehensive destruction. Emma's expression grew troubled. "I feel sorry for him, despite everything. Mental illness isn't something anyone deserves." Ray studied his daughter's face, recognizing the empathy that made her both admirable and potentially problematic. Emma's compassion was genuine and deep, qualities that would serve her well as an attorney, but might complicate her acceptance of the harsher realities of justice and revenge. "Grant made his choices when he was perfectly sane," Ray said quietly. "He chose to pursue a married woman, break up a family, and mock the man whose life he'd helped destroy. His current problems don't erase those decisions or their consequences." The words carried more weight than Emma realized, serving as both explanation and warning. Ray's code was simple and unforgiving. Betrayal had consequences that couldn't be avoided through subsequent misfortune or appeals to mercy. Grant had learned that lesson too late to benefit from the knowledge. Victoria's situation was more complex and ultimately more satisfying for Ray's purposes. She'd lost Grant's pharmaceutical fortune, but gained hard-won wisdom about the difference between genuine strength and inherited privilege. Her social status had plummeted from pharmaceutical royalty to comfortable middle class, forcing her to rebuild relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial advantage. Most importantly, Victoria had begun treating Ray with a genuine courtesy she'd once reserved for people she considered social equals. Their interactions during Emma's visits were cordial and respectful, marking a dramatic shift from the dismissive contempt she'd shown during their marriage's final years. "I misjudged you," Victoria admitted during a chance encounter at Emma's law firm. "I thought Grant represented security and sophistication, but you were the one with real substance. I'm sorry for how things ended between us." Ray accepted the apology graciously while internally noting its strategic timing. Victoria's newfound respect was based on his apparent success with Cass and Grant's obvious failure as a husband and provider. Her regret was genuine but conditional, dependent on circumstances that reinforced Ray's superiority to her failed second marriage. "We both made mistakes," Ray replied diplomatically. "What matters now is Emma's happiness and maintaining family relationships that work for everyone." The conversation was brief and professionally pleasant, but it marked Victoria's final acknowledgement that she'd chosen poorly when she'd traded Ray's solid competence for Grant's inherited advantages. The admission was more satisfying than any direct revenge could have been. Emma's wedding anniversary celebration provided the perfect occasion for Ray to display his complete triumph. He and Cass hosted a dinner party at their lakefront home, inviting Emma and Timothy along with carefully selected friends who represented Ray's renewed social influence. The guest list included business leaders, political figures, and cultural influencers who'd previously been beyond Ray's reach. Victoria attended as Emma's mother, her presence a testament to the new family dynamics that had emerged from the previous year's upheavals. She was gracious and appropriately appreciative of Ray's hospitality, playing her assigned role in the evening's careful choreography. The dinner conversation naturally turned to recent business developments and social changes within Millbrook's community. Grant's name came up briefly in connection with his pharmaceutical company's ongoing reorganization, but the discussion was clinical rather than personal, treating his downfall as an unfortunate but predictable consequence of personal instability. "Some people aren't built for sustained pressure," observed Harold Pine, Ray's attorney, who become a regular guest at such gatherings. "Success requires resilience that not everyone possesses, regardless of their background or advantages." The comment sparked a broader discussion about the relationship between inherited privilege and earned achievement, with Ray contributing observations based on his construction industry experience. His insights were received with respectful attention from guests who recognized genuine wisdom earned through decades of practical experience. Emma watched the evening's proceedings with obvious pride in her father's social resurrection and personal happiness. The contrast between Ray's current status and his apparent decline following the divorce wasn't lost on anyone present, including Victoria, who seemed genuinely pleased by her ex-husband's recovery. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Emma pulled Ray aside for a private conversation that had been building for months. "Dad, I need to ask you something directly," she said with a forthright manner that made her effective in court. "Grant's problems, they weren't entirely coincidental, were they?" Ray studied his daughter's face, recognizing the sharp intelligence that had made the question inevitable. Emma deserved honesty, but the complete truth would burden her with knowledge she might find difficult to accept. "Grant made enemies through his own choices and behavior," Ray replied carefully. "When someone builds their life on appearances rather than substance, any sustained pressure can cause everything to collapse. I didn't create his weaknesses, I just made sure they were tested." Emma nodded slowly, processing the admission without apparent shock or disapproval. "He destroyed our family and mocked you publicly. You made sure he paid for those choices. I made sure justice was served, Ray corrected. There's a difference between revenge and accountability. Grant learned that actions have consequences, even for people who think they're insulated by wealth and social position. The distinction was important to Ray's self-image and crucial for Emma's understanding of her father's character. He wasn't a petty man seeking vengeance, but a strategic thinker ensuring that betrayal carried appropriate costs. The campaign against Grant had been about justice rather than personal satisfaction. Emma embraced her father tightly, her response surprising him with its warmth and acceptance. "I'm proud of you, Dad. You never stopped fighting, and you never compromised your principles. That's the kind of strength I want to build my own life around." The conversation marked Emma's final transition from conflicted daughter torn between divorced parents to proud offspring of a man she'd learned to genuinely respect. Ray's strategic patience had reclaimed not only his social standing and personal happiness, but also his daughter's admiration and love. As Cass joined them on the deck overlooking the lake, Ray reflected on the completeness of his triumph. Grant Holloway was confined to psychiatric care, his fortune frozen